Think again, part 20. Why the fuck would we want to do that? Jobs snapped. That is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. The team had recognized the mobile phones were starting to feature the ability to play music, but Jobs was worried about cannibalizing Apple's thriving iPod business. He hated cell phones companies and didn't want to design products within the constraints that carriers imposed. When his calls dropped or the software crashed, he would sometimes smash his phone to the pieces in frustration. In private meetings, on public stages, he swore over and over he would never make a phone. Yet some of Apple's engineers were already doing research in that area. They worked together to persuade Jobs that he didn't know what he didn't know and urged him to doubt his convictions. It might be possible, they argued, to build a smartphone that everyone would love using and to get the carriers to do it Apple's way. Research shows that when people are resistant to change, it helps to reinforce what will stay the same. Visions for change are more compelling when they include visions of continuity. Although our strategy might evolve, our identity will endure. The engineers who worked closely with Jobs understood that this was one of the best ways to convince him. They assured him that they weren't trying to turn Apple into a phone company, it would remain a computer company. They were just taking their existing product and adding a phone on the side. Apple was already putting 20,000 songs in your pocket, so why wouldn't they put everything else in your pocket too? They needed to rethink their technology, but they would preserve their DNA. After 6 months of discussion, Jobs finally became curious enough to give the effort his blessing, and two different teams were off to the races in an experiment to test whether they should add calling capabilities to the iPod or turn the Mac into a miniature tablet that doubled as a phone. Just 4 years after it launched, the iPhone accounted for half of the Apple's revenue. The iPhone represented a dramatic leap in rethinking the smartphones. Since its inception, smartphone innovation has been much more incremental with different sizes and shapes, better cameras, and longer battery life, but few fundamental changes to the purpose and user experience. Looking back, if Mike Lazaridis had been more open to rethinking his pet product, would BlackBerry and Apple have compelled each other to reimagine the smartphone multiple times by now? The curse of knowledge is that it closes our mind to what we don't know. Good judgment depends on having the skill and the will to open our minds. I'm pretty confident that in life, rethinking is an increasingly important habit. Of course, I might be wrong. If I am, I'll be quick to think again. Well, the most annoying things people say instead of rethinking, well, that will never work. That's not what my experience has shown. That's too complicated. Let's not overthink it. That's the way we've always done it. Well, the greatest one is that's the way we've always done it. It is something more than half of it. Let's make it 65%. And right next to it is that's too complicated. Let's not overthink it. That is the second one. And the third one is that's not what my experience has shown.